For many years, I was working with individuals that had substance abuse issues and issues with self-esteem and codependency and things like that. And one of the things that just kept coming up over and over again was a pattern of having been in manipulative relationships. And whether it was a partner or a friend or a parent or a child or whoever, there was a connection between the substance abuse and the toxicity of the relationship. Now, we're not going to talk about substance abuse today. I'm just kind of throwing out the issue of that being kind of what triggered me to start looking more into this emotional abuse issue, narcissism, cluster B, and all that kind of thing. Shannon Thomas is a clinician who wrote a book called Healing from Hidden Abuse. And this quote I found out of her book. If you all are familiar with this book, it's really good. But she says toxic people are great actors, and they'll utilize whatever props are available to maintain control in the relationship. And this is key because there's a lot of tools that are being used in manipulative relationships that are not functional from the standpoint of we're not going to see these in healthy relationships. And we'll go through a lot of those today. But this was a great quote kind of to give us an idea of you're really dealing with people that are acting, quote unquote. Of course, they don't think they're acting. But they're utilizing all of these different sort of dysfunctional, toxic skills to move along in this relationship. Okay, so it's, dysfunction over dysfunction over dysfunction. Okay, so before we jump into how we're going to help these individuals, it is extremely important to understand trauma. One, because these are traumatic relationships. And two, because if you're in a traumatic relationship or in a toxic relationship like we're going to talk about today, 9 times out of 10, the client you're dealing with has experienced trauma earlier on in their lifetime. Okay, now this can come from caregivers, it can come from parents, it can come from an event that occurred in their life, it can come from substance abuse, it can come from abuse in their childhood, it can come from all different kinds of sources. But it is critical that we understand trauma and how it presents, and also understand that this is a systemic issue, which is going to put the person that you're dealing with or the person that you're working with in your office. Okay, it's not going to be, I was perfectly fine, everything was functional, and then suddenly I found myself in a toxic relationship. That does not happen. Okay, especially close, intimate partner relationships. Now, can we find ourselves in an agency setting as an employee, and there happens to be a boss or a coworker who's toxic? 100%. But if you're coming from a reasonably functional place, you are not going to be putting up with any of that junk. You're going to just put your head down, do your work. That stuff isn't necessarily going to cause you that much distress. I mean, obviously, it's a pain to work with somebody who's toxic, but it's not going to be something that's going to sort of throw you for a loop. And you certainly aren't going to, or your clients aren't going to, be putting themselves in that situation over and over, trying to gain some kind of affirmation or validation from the toxic person. But individuals who've experienced trauma will. So let's jump in and look at what is trauma. So trauma arises from an inescapable stressful event that overwhelms people's coping skills. Okay, this is a quote from Colkin Fissler. So when trauma is experienced in childhood, it harms this healthy development of a sense of self. It also harms the development of a healthy brain. And that limits the integration of memory or our ability or the client's ability to feel at ease. And it also affects our confidence in knowing who we are. So our identity or our client's identity. They're also functioning from an inflated level of stress hormones, because that's what happens when you're in a constant state of trauma or stress. And this causes damage and harm to the person's body, brain, all of those kinds of things. So the younger we are, or the younger your client is, the more likely that trauma-related conditions will occur and persist. That's assuming that they have experienced trauma. Okay, so we always want to assess when you're working with individuals who are reporting that they are in a toxic relationship, or that you're working with them and you realize, oh, this sounds like a toxic relationship. We need to go back and ask questions about previous trauma. Okay. So many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the adverse childhood experiences, which is just trauma by another name. They put it into a format called ACEs. And these were identified back in the 1990s, and they include all of the possible things, or some of the possible things that can happen in a dysfunctional household. So when I am talking and assessing a client, whether it is someone who is manipulative or someone who is in a toxic relationship, I'm always going to ask questions about what was going on when they were a child, okay? So in the adverse childhood experiences includes all of these different kinds of things: abuse and neglect, exposure to natural disasters or war, by witnessing violence, parental separation, a close family member attempts or dies by suicide, household mental health problems or substance abuse, and homelessness or criminality or something along those lines. So that's the kind of thing that you're going to be looking for. And you're going to be discussing or asking questions not only about abuse or things that seem overt, but also covert. So were there neglectful things? Did someone in their family system, the client's family system, never say, I love you? Did they not ask about what was going on in the child's life? Were they absent? Were they more concerned with their own issues and that kind of stuff? So, but the effects of this are cumulative. So as the child experiences more and more of these things, so does the impact. Okay, and so we want to find out whether or not these things are going on in this person's life, or had gone on in this person's life, when we're doing our initial assessment, if this person is presenting really with anything, but if it's a potential toxic relationship that they're in and they can't seem to get out of it. And this is a little visual, just kind of to give you an idea of what the effects of trauma can be. I've got a couple of other slides on this. But this gives you kind of an idea of like the parts of the brain that are responsible for rational thinking and reasoning will close down. And the body prepares to defend itself. Okay, so the developing brain becomes more sensitive to stress. The immune system is impaired. Trauma changes the brain structure. It disrupts functions of memory and reasoning, and it keeps individuals stuck in a survival loop, which does have a connection to what we're talking about today. And I wanted to add this little visual as well, because I think it's also all of these things that I'm offering today as we talk about that, I use with my own clients because it helps them understand that, one, if there's research on all of this, then they're not the only person who's experienced it. And it helps them understand how this long-term stuff that's been going on in their life has affected them over the years. Because amazingly enough, there may be clients who do not connect that whatever happened to them had a direct result to what's going on with their toxic relationship now. Because getting connected with somebody who's toxic it has everything to do with how you view yourself. And the way you view yourself has everything to do with where you came from.